Welcome everyone again to Basecamp and to the fourth session that we've run in this team discovery series. Great to see a lot of you familiar faces joining, which is fantastic, and really looking forward to today's session where we'll be continuing on from last week. So obviously last week we touched on the strategy side of team discovery and looking at mapping your objectives to do with the strategy. So we're going to continue off that and really keep building on what we learned last week. So to start off with, as you'll all know, when we pop people into the team discovery wheel, we sort of find out their formation and we can see the strengths and the cautionaries that might arise from a team's natural formation and how they're actually placed depending on which quadrant they are in. From there, you're able to select objectives. And now this is where it gets really, I would say, is the key part of team discovery, is actually mapping the objectives of the team and linking it to your overall strategy. So definitely something that everyone can be thinking of as we're almost into 2023, which is crazy to think about. But what is the strategy for your team or for a team that you're managing? What is their strategy for next year? Let's map out the objectives. Let's talk it through and let's see how that aligns with the team's formation. Are they able to naturally align on the objectives? Are they able to actually hit those targets that have been set? Or are they in a gap area where they're going to need further support, where they're going to need guidance, and where they're going to need a little bit of awareness to help them understand that maybe they're going to have to push outside their comfort zone and actually flex into a different quadrant? So as we went through last week, you're able to pick objectives, normally about 4 or 5 of the key objectives you want to focus on. And from there, you get not only the team type, but now the strategy type. And we can start to see if the strategy that the team is trying to achieve is different to their natural team type. And more often than not, it is. I was just doing a little bit of PI reading and I saw somewhere a stat that said about almost 80% of teams will have a different strategy type to their team type. So it is very common for teams to be trying to achieve objectives that sit outside of their natural formation. So of course, some objectives might align, but more often than not all 4 or 5 will. There will be a couple that will sit outside, sort of in those gap areas. And it's really great to be mindful of it, especially as a manager, as a leader, and then to be able to share that awareness with the team to really build their skills in order to achieve any objectives that sit in those gap areas. So the tool gives you all this information. It obviously allows you to select the objectives, tells you the strategy type. It will give you strengths and cautions. And from there, last week, we actually talked about a couple of different case studies and what we would do to help improve the current team's formation and how we can help strengthen any gap areas that they might have. But today we're going to look at it from a bit of a different perspective. We're actually going to look at it from the perspective that we need to make a hire. So just a bit of a recap, last week, we went through this team here that I've popped up on the screen. They're a cultivating team. So we've got most of the people who sit in the top half of the wheel within 2 in the innovation and agility, and then 4 people in that teamwork and employee experience quadrant. We only have 1 person who sits in results and discipline. So we've got 1 person who sits a little bit outside of the team as a whole. But when we went through and we selected the objectives for this team, we actually saw that 3 of their objectives are now to do with the bottom half of the wheel instead of the top half. So that is a little bit of a gap area because, as you were all able to identify, we have this huge gap in process and precision. We've only got 1 results-oriented team member. How are people in those top 2 quadrants going to actually flex downwards and be able to achieve the objectives in the bottom half of the wheel? Now, and I'm not sure if anyone remembers this from the very first webinar, but just to reiterate, whenever a person needs to flex diagonally, it is extremely difficult. So for example, the 2 people who sit in the top right-hand side of the wheel in that innovation and agility quadrant, they will really struggle to flex into the process and precision quadrant. For them, it will be a really great effort to flex their natural behaviors in order to meet those objectives. So again, if they're not guided, if they're not supported, if they're not given the awareness that they have to do that, they innately won't think about it. It definitely won't be the top of their priority list. So it's really important that we give that support and that we have those conversations. Now, two big things that I want to bring up, especially if you were to understand this team's formation, plot their objectives, but then do nothing about it in the sense of just leave the gap area as it is. One big issue that will arise is strategy risk. So this team is at greater risk of not achieving their strategy. Yes, they might meet those top objectives in the teamwork and employee experience quadrant. They might be great at providing service and support. They might really work easily with others to help resolve any issues. But where they're really going to struggle is when they need to plan projects that are measured and that can be tracked and shared with others. That's going to be a really big flex for them. So if we do nothing, we've got potential strategy risk that might occur, and that's going to lead to missed targets. So this team might not be hitting these objectives 100%. They might be missing their KPIs. They might be missing any types of goals that have been set. And we know that that can be disheartening to a team, especially if they feel that they're putting the output in. So they're trying their best to achieve the objectives, but they're not hitting the mark. Could also lead to a more disengaged team. It could decrease motivation. It could get them to start feeling like they're not having any wins. So really important that when we observe any of these key issues, that we act upon them to help sort of decrease any strategy risk and any potential that they might miss their targets. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at it from a higher perspective and look at it from, okay, this team actually needs an additional team member that we're going to bring on board that is more suited to the objectives that we have laid out. Now, really important that whenever we're doing any hiring, that we still go back and use the job profiling tool. So everyone should have access to the hire module and have access to be able to create a job and actually profile it to meet the needs of the role. So really important that when we're profiling any position that we're thinking about the needs of the role, not necessarily what we're like in terms of our profiles or someone that we really like in the team, purely thinking about it from that role perspective. So I've got here a job profile that I've created to help fill in the gap for this team. And does anyone want to guess where this person most preferably will be situated? In which quadrant will this new hire potentially have to be in when we're looking at it from the gap areas? Does anyone want to pop in the chat before I reveal which quadrant are we more than likely looking to hire in? Is it the top right, innovation agility? Is it bottom right, results and discipline? Are we looking at the bottom left, the process and precision, or are we looking at the top left, the teamwork and customer experience? Which quadrant do we think this job profile might be situated in?
Alexia, we have some coming through on the chat. So
great.
Everyone's going with process, so bottom left quadrant.
Perfect. Yes, that's right, everyone. We've got the bottom left quadrant, the process and precision. So you'll see now the reference profile has come up. So after I've gone through, I've created the job profile. I've said that I need someone who is quite collaborative in nature, so we're still getting that team player mentality, someone who's a little bit maybe reserved and thoughtful, so maybe bringing that technical and analytical expertise. Still quite driving though, so willing to move at a fast pace and ensure that multiple priorities are getting done, but having that precision to them. So having that accuracy, being able to follow rules and structure, and being able to ensure that things are being done correctly will be really important. So as you all know, when you do a job profile, you get the top 3 reference profiles that pop up. And the first one for this profile is a specialist. And typically specialists live in that process and precision quadrant. So again, why we've got the job profile and we've got team discovery is that we can't forget the objectives of the team and the team's formation. So it's really crucial that we actually use both these tools hand in hand. So we don't purely focus on team discovery and we don't just focus on the job profile. We actually use them in combination to help us identify, okay, where's the gap area? Let me go and profile the job with that in mind in terms of this role needs those certain characteristics that would come out of that process and precision quadrant. And then when we see the reference profile that pops out of the job profile, we can then start to view where our candidates should be situated. Now, let's imagine we've had a few candidates who have applied, we've done a bit of a short list, and we've actually plotted those candidates in the same team to see how they match in terms of the rest of the team members, as well as to see which quadrants do they sit in. And I've tried to color code them so you'll be able to see that in the bottom left quadrant, the process and precision, we've got 2 people who are in green. In the bottom right, we've got a person who's sitting in there sort of in that orange color. And then we have a person in red in that innovation and agility, and another person in red in that teamwork and employee experience. And you can do this actually on the software. You can click on the person's little sort of colored arrow, so to speak, and you can change the color to sort of help you identify who is the current team, who are any candidates, who's the manager. So all of that's possible within the tool. But what I'm trying to do here is visually show you when we plot the candidates into the wheel, we can start to see where do they sit. So obviously we've got 2 candidates in that top half, and we sort of already know that we've got enough people who sit in those quadrants. More than likely, we don't need to hire another person in those 2 quadrants because, again, they're going to fall a little bit short from the bottom half of the wheel's objectives. And then we've got a couple candidates who sit in our process and precision, which is great, and then 1 candidate who sits in our results and discipline. So really important that when you're going through and you're preparing for any interviews or you're preparing to see who you would like to interview, in this case, when you are trying to hire for a role that's to fill a gap area to do with the team and their strategy, that we plot those people in the quadrants and we see where they sit to help us formulate those decisions when we go about selecting who to interview. Now, I just wanted to bring up that it is very common. So again, I'm not sure if anyone's had any experience, but it's very common if we were to say that the 2 people in the teamwork and employee experience quadrant were to interview the person who also sits in that quadrant, or maybe the person that sits in the innovation and agility quadrant, you're probably 100% going to hit it off. And that's very similar if you were to interview anyone who sits in the same quadrant as you or who has a very similar reference profile as you, because you're going to be talking a little bit that same lingo. So obviously the team members in that teamwork and employee experience quadrant, they're going to be quite sociable. So is that candidate who's in that quadrant. So they're probably going to hit it off quite quickly, be really open in their conversations, be able to talk about how they can situate really well in the team. It's probably going to be a great interview, which is fantastic. But what we always have to remember is, does that person actually suit the role and the requirements in the role, and are they going to be able to help us hit our goals and our objectives to do with our strategy? So it's just something that I wanted to point out because it is very common whenever, like I said, you're interviewing someone who is similar reference profile or maybe sits in the same quadrant, that you get along quite quickly and you feel that they've got some similar strength areas too that might be useful in the team. We always have to take it back to what's expected in the role. So for example, if we were to interview someone in the process and precision quadrant, they're probably going to be a little bit more reserved than us if we sit in teamwork and employee experience. They might be a little bit more thoughtful in their answers, but again, let's look at it from the perspective of what the role needs rather than, how did I feel about that situation? How did I feel about that interview? And did that person, mesh with me 100%? We're looking at it from that role perspective. And Sarah, if you can let me know if anything comes up on the chat. Sorry, it's not showing up on my screen.
Yeah,
if any key
no problem.
questions come up.
Chen just wrote, it's a good point, like unconscious bias. And I just wrote back to everyone saying, yeah, it's absolutely like unconscious bias, because we find people who are similar to us more appealing, and we need to look at what the role is, exactly like you said, rather than looking for similarities in what we like and what we find appealing.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. And I'm sure if you're to reflect, everyone might have a key reference profile that they really like interviewing. So if you've done enough interviews, and maybe Chan, you might be able to pop in there, because I know that you probably have a bit of experience with that. But yeah, you might have a reference profile or two that you actually really enjoy whenever you're interviewing them. It's quite common, but yeah, definitely trying to take away that unconscious bias and looking at it from that role perspective, 100%. So let's say now that we've gone through and we've actually decided to hire this person who sits in the process and precision quadrant. So they're going to be joining our team, which is really exciting. But you might be thinking, well, one key difference is that they obviously are a little bit situated away from the rest of the team. And that's quite similar for the other employee who sits in that results and discipline quadrant. Now you've got these two employees who have some slightly different strength areas. They're going to have some different behavioral tendencies in terms of how they show up with their drivers. They're not going to be the same like the rest of the team. But where I think it can work as a strength, because sometimes you could be a little bit hesitant to bring that different person into the mix, is that they can act as a balancer in this team, and similar that other team member who sits in that results and discipline quadrant. So whenever we have team members who sit outside of the majority, let's say, or the majority of the team formation, they most definitely can act as a balancer, because they're going to help fill in gap areas that the rest of the team sort of maybe needing that a bit more awareness in terms of being able to flex on that behavior. So these two team members will become your balancers, and they're going to help with a couple key areas in terms of the objectives that need to be met. So it's definitely not something to fear or to say that it is bad to hire people who are different in terms of reference or behavioral profile. Sometimes I get that question a lot. Should I be hiring people who are the same? Should I be hiring people who are all different? There's no right or wrong answer. It's really dependent on the position and the type of person that you need, the responsibilities that they need to fulfill, but definitely don't view people who sit outside of the majority as a bad thing. It can help strengthen those gap areas. And I know that whenever you're building out a team, we do love to say that you probably do want to have people who sit a little bit opposite to each other rather than just building out all the same, because it helps create that diversity within the team. Everyone's filling in each other's gaps and bringing their own strengths. So I thought it would be good when we're looking at these two team members now who sit in the bottom half of the wheel, what are the two key drives that are going to be different in comparison to the people who sit in the top half of the wheel? So when we think of the A, dominance drive, the B, extroversion drive, the C, patience drive, and the D, formality drive, what will be the key differences between the majority of the team and the two candidates that sit in the bottom half of the wheel? And again, feel free to pop this in the chat. What are the two key drivers that will be different?
Just waiting for some to come through, Alexia, but Lee's coming nice and early with formality.
Yes, perfect. Formality will definitely be one, yes. And another one that anyone can think of, what else might be a little bit different for this group in comparison to those two new employee and the existing employees in the bottom half?
Also from Lee, stability.
looking at that patient's drive, yes. So Lee, you definitely hit the nail on the head there in terms of that. The new employee that's just joined, as well as the employee who sits in that results and discipline quadrant, so the two balances, are going to have a higher formality drive. So their D drive is going to sit on the right-hand side of the midpoint. So where we can start to compare, if we were to look at the specialist profile, they would have a D over C factor combination. So they're going to be more careful with rules. If we were to compare it with the promoter profile, and promoters typically tend to be in that teamwork and employee experience quadrant, they're going to be casual with rules. So we've got a key difference there in terms of that formality drive. So now you've got an additional team member to join the other person that results in discipline field to help maybe build out process, to implement some structure, maybe to help ensure that things are being tracked and measured correctly, that things are being done as they should when they need to be. So you've got some people ensuring that accuracy and maintaining that things are being done correctly. They're also going to have a lower extroversion drive, and that's a key factor whenever we're looking at a team where the majority sit in the top half of the wheel, because a specialist, they're going to more likely be D over B, so they're going to be a bit more formal in nature, maybe take a little bit more time to trust and build rapport, versus a promoter who's going to be B over D, very informal, is just going to get straight into the conversation, ask you about your weekend, ask you to give them more context about what you were up to, really dig into that conversation. Now, sometimes if there isn't awareness to do with the differences that certain people may have, it can cause a little bit of tension. So have seen situations and heard about situations where a high sociable drive person working with someone who has that lower, more reserved nature to them, so that lower extroversion drive, they start to have some issues where they find that the person isn't responding quick enough to them. Maybe they've just popped into their office and they want an answer really fast. The person who has that lower extroversion drive needs a bit more time to think things through, maybe prefers to email them rather than talk in person all the time, always be on the phone. I'm not sure if anyone has any team members or anyone that they work with in the extended organization. You might be a high sociable drive and someone who is more on the reserve side, and normally, yes, they would prefer an email rather than just picking up the phone and calling you. I'm sure that a few people have had those situations where they can relate to that. So what's really important is that even though we've got these balances in the team, we still need to bridge that awareness. So we still need to share the behavioral reports, talk it through with the teams, what are my strengths? What are the areas where I might work a little bit differently? How can we compromise, work better together? Because if we don't explain, if we don't give any awareness on our differences, it can cause a little bit of tension within the team. But once that is given, and once everyone has that clarity, this team can work really successfully in terms of filling each other's gap areas and ensuring that they're meeting those objectives that have been set. Now, it's also really important to think about onboarding, and I just thought to add that as well in the slides today. So, of course, whenever we're onboarding, when we've got someone new, really important that we tailor that process for them. And again, this is where you can reference PI, where you can use the behavior report and various other tools that exist within the system to make sure that the onboarding process is unique and sort of individualized to them. So yes, there'll always be certain processes and structure that will be the same, but when we look at a person's self graph, we can really understand some of the key things that they need from you as a manager or a leader in order to be successful, especially in that first 3 to 6 month period. Is there any key things that anyone can observe? So when we're looking at this behavioral pattern here on the right hand side, so we've got this specialist who's joining our team, and we've got their behavioral pattern. What might be really important in the onboarding process to give them? So when we're looking at their drivers, what might be some key things that you would most definitely have to provide this specialist joining your team? That again might be a little bit individualized because we're looking just at their behavioral pattern. how might we take a little bit of a different approach with them and make sure that we're onboarding them as successfully as possible when we're looking at their profile? Any thoughts?
Alexa, nothing's coming through, but from what I'm seeing, if we look at, oh, here we go. I'll pause for a second. I've got some commentary that's come through while I've been speaking. Lee said is give them written instructions and explain the rules. And then Chan also said set right expectations at the onset, rules, guidelines, and big picture overview.
Yes, fantastic. Definitely, you can see that their highest driver. So when we're looking at which driver is furthest to the right, it's that D, that formality drive. So for this person, clarity will mean everything. Clarity in terms of what is expected of them, being really clear on the process and the structure that they can follow, outlining that, providing them with all the information will be crucial. Because once they've got that clarity of what's expected of them, they can go about doing their job to a high standard. So whenever we have someone with that high formality drive, we have to remember that they want to be an expert in their field. They really pride themselves on being a subject matter expert. So they'll really want to understand what's expected of them in order to do the right work, because for them, that's very important. It also is really important whenever we have someone with a high formality drive to provide them with any additional training that they might need. Again, they'll be like a sponge. They will soak that up because that will help, build their skill set. And especially if that means that they can perform their job to a higher standard, they will absolutely be on board with that. So again, thinking about it from that perspective, is there any systems or any tools that are used that this person needs to be trained on to be up to speed with the rest of the team? Or opening that conversation and allowing them to maybe bring their ideas forward, especially when we're looking at it from that process perspective. They might have some key tools or some good strategies of how to ensure that this team maybe can follow a little bit more of a structure or implement a bit more of a process. So starting to have those conversations. It will also be really crucial. We can see that their patients drive sits on the low hand side, so that we're feeling comfortable to give them multiple priorities. So this person will definitely want to work in a fast nature. So not necessarily just one task at a time and in a very routine-based role, that we give them a little bit of that confidence to be able to go about to do their work and to manage multiple priorities at once. They'll feel quite driven by the fact that they can do a lot, but still maintain that accuracy piece. So with that D, that formality drive, they're always going to make sure things are being done correctly, even though they're moving at a fast pace. We can also see when we look at their factor combinations, they've got the A over C factor combination, so they're quite proactive. So that will follow through with that. They'll be very driven and motivated to hit the goals of the team. So it'll be important again to share what's the strategy for this group? What are the objectives that we're trying to hit? Where can this person actually help us achieve those objectives? They'll want to hear all of that to help set out their own goals and to help achieve the teams as well and the overall strategy that's trying to be achieved. So definitely hitting on those comments that people popped in. But some strengths for this team member that you're onboarding is that they're going to be really detail orientated, very thorough. They're going to bring a little bit more of that introspective and thoughtful approach, which might be good, especially as we're starting to see that this team needs process. They need a bit more structure, so they'll be able to think about it from that technical lens. They're going to be really precise with strong execution, so things won't get missed. In terms of errors, they're not going to let things slip. They're going to be really in on the detail. Now, as always, whenever we're looking at a person's profile, it's also good for us to just have awareness of some caution areas that might arise. And these can definitely happen in moments of stress or pressure. And they can also just be areas that maybe your other team members might be a little bit different on. So again, just having that awareness factor. Whenever we're dealing with a person who has a slightly lower extroversion drive, so if they sit on the reserve side, sometimes they can be a little bit more direct and to the point in terms of their communication style. And again, really important that we communicate that to the rest of the team, because we've got quite a sociable team here who are going to be a little bit more open, maybe talk a bit more about their weekend, or maybe go off the agenda slightly. For them, when they speak to a person, it's not just about the topic that they want to discuss. It might also include something else. So just giving that awareness that this new team member is going to be a little bit more to the point. They want to get their work done and discuss what needs to be discussed, and not get distracted. Also, just to be a little bit cautious when any new action is required. Again, just hitting that, the fact that they're, they want to be an expert, they've got that high formality drive, just being a little bit cautious whenever anything new is being implemented that might affect how they work, just to give a little bit of that time and clarity in terms of what's changing, so they can put the necessary measures in place. So again, really important whenever we're thinking about the hiring process that we use the job profiling tool. We link it up with the team discovery wheel in terms of the objectives and where should this person sit, but then continue it even after you've hired them. So think about the onboarding process. How can we bring in what we know from their PI profile, the strengths that are going to come out from sitting in the team's formation. So again, giving them that clarity in terms of what they've been hired for and how they've been hired to help meet certain objectives in the team, and to help strengthen the team in those areas. Really important to just continue that whole communication process. Alrighty, so to help them be as successful as possible, a lot like what we've just mentioned, be really clear and upfront in terms of what's expected of them, provide that guidance, get them trained quickly, like the reference profile suggests they are specialists, so they'll want to be an expert. Give them that documentation so they're across all the details, and definitely recognize that at times they do need a little bit of space. So give them that time to think things through, process their thoughts. They are formulating it. They will give you a response. They might just need a little bit more time. Alrighty, and again, yes, allow them the opportunity to build structure, and that's an area where they can help with this team in terms of they will, if they don't see any structure, feel quite comfortable to build it out and start to implement it themselves. Alrighty, now another key tool that I just wanted to bring up that you can use during the onboarding process. You can of course use it in any type of one-on-one situation with a team member. This management strategy guide isn't just for an onboarding situation, but if you do have access to the Inspire module, whenever you click on a person's name and you go to their person page, on the left-hand side, there are various tools available, and one of them is the management strategy guide. And I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's a great guide to use in the onboarding process, especially because it helps you as a manager, as a leader, understand what does this person need from me from the perspective in terms of how they like to be managed. So it's a guide that has 12 key statements, and these statements are specific to do with a person's behavioural pattern. So they will change depending on the pattern that this person has. But they can go through and they can read these statements and they can circle in terms of which ones are the key statements that they need from their manager, which ones maybe that they haven't received in the past that they'd like to receive a little bit more of. It helps give you that clarity as their manager and leader. So you might see one of the statements here is give clear, concise goals and explicit communication about expectations. So we can already start to see that, okay, if I'm managing this person, I need to be really clear in how I'm setting out what the work is to be done. I can't just give really brief, quick notes and a really brief summary. I actually need to be detailed in my approach, because through detail, they'll be able to do the work to a higher level. Maybe give them a little bit more clarity in terms of the requirements and the processes that are available to help them achieve their results. So a really powerful tool that you can start to use and have this conversation with the team member in order to identify, okay, what do you need from me as a manager and as a leader? How can I help support you best? Talk it through with them. They can, again, refer to this, 3-6 months down the track. You might bring this back up in a one-on-one meeting. look at the statements, double check that everything's working well, that you are hitting those areas that they need from you, and also to see if there's anything more that they might need or a bit further support. So a great tool that's in your possession, if you've got the Inspire module, is this management strategy guide, great for onboarding. And again, you can use it with any team member in any one-on-one situation where you just want to have a bit more of an understanding on how you can tailor your management style to suit their needs and their behavioral tendencies that will show up at work. Out of curiosity, does anybody use the management strategy guide or has used it before and it's helped them with a team member that maybe they're a little bit different from you? And from reading this guide, you got a little bit more of a understanding in terms of how you should manage them or how you can work better together. If you haven't used it yet, definitely check it out. It's available, like I said, whenever you search for a person, left-hand side, it will say management strategy guide, just click on it and it will pop up and you'll be able to download it and view it as well.
Nothing's coming through on the chat there, Alexia, but oh, hang on, Lee, my manager, Chang, and I have gone through it with each other years ago. I'm hoping it was very useful, but I think we could all use it at some point. You probably reflect back on a time when you're like, I wish I had a tool like this available that I could use to navigate those situations. Thanks for sharing, Lee.
Thank you. Alrighty, so as we wrap up, I just wanted to go through some of the key features of team discovery, and for those of you who have been on the calls for the last couple of weeks, just to reiterate all the amazing things that you can do through the team discovery tool. So we can look at that team member plotting, so we can start to see the team's formation, get the behavioral insights in terms of their strength areas as well as their gap areas. Look at it from that team analysis perspective. Do we need to hire more people who sit in maybe different quadrants? Who are our next team members? Who do they need to be? We can look at that collective group team type and we can start to see, okay, what are the strengths that everyone shares? What are the caution areas? Then looking at it from that strategy perspective, let's map out our objectives and let's see our alignment to the strategy that we're trying to achieve. You then uncover the strategy type and see if it's different to your team type, which like we said is pretty common to be. And then from there, the tool does give you customized action plans. So it does give you key takeaways. It does highlight the strengths and the caution areas. So all of that is available. And then from there, you can even look at it from that strategic hiring perspective to help you hire the right person based off those gap areas. So lots of key features. I'm sure there's even more, but these are what we've gone through over the last 4 weeks, sort of deep diving into team discovery. So I do want to do a little bit of a call to action for those of you who do have access to design and who maybe have a team available or a couple teams available. I would most definitely encourage you to plot a team within Discovery. Preferably, it might be a team that you're working with or a team that maybe has to achieve a new strategy. Find out what their team type is. Have a look at their strongest drivers. What's the strengths of this team? Do you have a team who is situated in one quadrant or two quadrants? Are their strengths quite similar? Or do you have a team that sits a little bit everywhere? So maybe you've got a good mix in the group. Find out what are the key drivers amongst the team. From there, select your objectives, link it up to your strategy, especially as we're going into the new year. Really important that you gain that alignment and share that awareness with the broader team. And then finally, action plan. Where must the team flex? So if we're looking at it just from that existing team perspective, who is situated in maybe those areas that are gap areas in others that can help lead or help support? How can the team flex when they have to fulfill an objective that maybe sits outside of their comfort area, or do we have to look at it from that hiring perspective that maybe we need to hire someone down the track to help fill those gaps? And for anyone who doesn't have access to team discovery, again, feel free to reach out to me. I've just popped my email here on the slide and I can, if you have any questions, I can help you sort of identify how you can get access to a team, or similarly, if anyone has run a team through discovery and just wants a bit more of an understanding or has any questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can book some time. But that sort of ends it for today. Thank you everyone for joining.